Hi Facebook Live, here we are, Cardiff. It's not raining, it's a good sign. My name is Richard Crompton. I'm going to take you this evening. I'm just putting on my wellies if you're wondering what's going on. Sorry about the dodgy camera work. This is the COVID-19 approach to guided bat walks. Is do it without any help. So on go the wellies. And on goes the high-vis, because we're going to the woods. High-vis jacket, and you've got to remember there's only one thing worse than a weirdo in the woods, and that's an inconspicuous weirdo in the woods. So excuse me while I just put the phone down 1 second. Rubbish TV. Okay, I've got my bat detectors, I've got a torch, I'm going to put that in my pocket. Mr. Barber, hello. Becky, hello Becky. How do we get into these things? I missed you the other night, Mark, sorry about that. Right, there was a rookie error here. It's a bit early. Somebody warned me about this on Facebook today, but we'd already set the time, so it's tough. Right, this is me walking out the front of my house, there's my car. Kids asleep upstairs. Green bins. Gotta do that later. So yeah, I'm walking out of my own front door down to a little woodland. The other reason for the high-vis is because I'm going to see people. Around and about. And this is a little bit weird. Actually, there's lots of people around. So I'm taking you to a little woodland. I just wanted to show that it genuinely is on my doorstep. So I'm actually walking to it now. I need to walk a bit slower, it's far too early. Emma Douglas, hi. This is extremely surreal. I'm quite excited about this. So I want to tell you about this little woodland. I live in Radda in Cardiff. I'm sorry I'm not in East Talbot, but it's not exactly an essential journey, is it? So otherwise I expect we'd be doing a lovely bat walk around somewhere nice like Margam Park. Anyway, so this is the woodland I'm coming to. You can see behind me. I come here most days with my kids. Hello Helen. It's a really nice bit of woodland. It's very mixed. I suppose oak is the dominant species, but it's got some ash, some sycamore, some garden vagrants, bit of nice hazel understory. Dog walk central, here we go. Right, can I turn the camera around? Should have worked out how to do that before now. There it is. Oh yes. Right. So, this is the little woodland. It's about as far as you can see, so you can see the daylight in the background. I've got some weird notification up. There we are, that's good. If you can see the daylight in the background, kind of there, that's the end of the wood. It's really quite tiny. It's completely surrounded by houses in this little patch of suburbia up here in top end of Cardiff. Motorways, I don't know, about a mile away. Castell Cork across the valley, and there's some beautiful trees. Isn't it amazing? Very, very lucky. I have to say, the house that we live in, which I didn't show you because it's a bit of a daft thing to do on the internet, is a bit mundane, our house. It's very suburban. I'm an ecologist, not a footballer. And in looking at the house when we bought it about 7 years ago, I actually stumbled upon this place just as I pulled in to look at particulars of the house, and spotted these trees and actually came for a little walk down here before we even sort of decided which houses to go and view. And I was instantly very taken with this little patch right on the doorstep. Look at this beautiful oak here. Lovely ash trees here. few of them are showing signs of ash dieback, unfortunately, but that's something we've got to deal with everywhere. Interesting conifer species that I need to get the ID book out on there, not quite sure what that is. A couple of little benches. It's dog poo central, unfortunately. It's not a very relaxing place to bring your 3.5-year-old daughter who just runs around like a mad thing. Look at this lovely standing deadwood here. See, it's a really nice tree. I'm not sure how well you can see this. If I do a little bit better camera work, maybe there. Can you see that a bit better? Yeah, okay. There, you can see it beautifully silhouetted there, so take my word for it, that's a completely dead standing oak. And there's another one a bit further along as well. Oh, there's a nice dead snag just in there. Centre of the frame just there, and perhaps just make that out as well. And then some of the trees around, there's some features in some of these which are particularly good for bats. Anyway, I need to tell you some stuff. Who am I? I'm Richard Crompton. I'm president of Cardiff Bat Group. I'm a bat consultant, and I've been specialising in bats professionally since 1998. Very lucky to get to work with British bats virtually all the time. It's pretty much all I do, and I've been South Wales based since about 2010, and prior to that I was actually based up in Aberystwyth. Right, my torch on there, can you see there's some nice little woodpecker holes in there, there's some more at the top there. Right, okay, let me sort out the camera work. Hard to see, isn't it? A little bit. Okay, a little bit challenging, but take my word for it, there's some rather nice features here. Now, I had a look through my kit bag, realised that my brain has melted since March. It's been a slightly weird time for us all, hasn't it? But we're not talking about that today. So I was trying to work out what equipment to use tonight, and one of the things I was trying to decide on was what... Oh, yeah, I did swap to landscape. Sorry about that. I'm gonna swap back and talk to you for a moment. Hello, I'm back. Right. I was trying to decide what kind of bat detector to use tonight, and I'm lucky. This is my job. I've got a lot of kit, all sorts of different bat detectors. The one that I thought I was going to use initially, I'm going to square with you. I can't find it. I've no idea where it is. It's around somewhere. It's a bit embarrassing, but I haven't needed it yet this year. It'll be somewhere, but anyway. And I thought, hold on, no, this should be approachable. This whole exercise should be approachable. Should be using equipment that people have got a chance at being able to borrow, or maybe even splash out and invest. So I've got two bat detectors with me. One is this one, which is the very lovely bat scanner from Echolocation Electronics. Really nice little thing. I think they're about 250 quid, but unfortunately that's the lower end of the market for these things. And the other one I've got, I'm just going to put this down on the bench because I'm going to run out of hands otherwise, it's in here somewhere, another pocket. It's this one. It's the Magenta Bat 5, and I think these are about £95. That's the one I'm going to use the most this evening. So I've got both of those, put fresh batteries in them. Let's not have any more rookie errors. We had some tech challenges this evening, of course, which is compulsory with anything online, isn't it? So those are the detectors I'm going to use tonight. Now, it did occur to me that 9:10 is perhaps a little bit early. But I didn't realise that until it was too late. I was more horrified about an hour ago when it was absolutely pouring it down with rain here. I can hear a few raindrops at the moment, but actually it doesn't look too bad. Certainly doesn't look as bad as it was about an hour and a half ago, just before I put the kids to bed with my wife. It was really pouring down outside, so the ground's quite wet. I've put my wellies on in case I want to go off into the undergrowth a little bit. As I said, it is dog poo central here, which is a bit unfortunate, but pick up your dog poo, people. What a funny thing. So now it's the waiting game. I've just realised that my clock is on my phone, which I can't see while I'm doing Facebook Live. So if somebody wants to type in a time check for me, that would be amazing. Hi Laura, nice to see you. Sorry Debbie about the sideways picture. I might go sideways, no promises, no promises. I'm afraid I'm just one of those unpredictable types, you just never know. Yeah, somebody type in a time check for me, so I know roughly where we are. Sunset's about 25 past 9 or something. 2021, thank you Alison, thank you NBT Wildlife, cheers Mark. Okay, thank you Catherine. It's definitely 21:21. So we're about on sunset, so actually, yeah, okay, if that's the time now, then that's very helpful. So I pretty much would expect to see a bat from any time now. So what are we listening for? Well, let's set the scene a bit before we get any bats. Probably got a couple of minutes, you never know. What are bats? Bats are mammals. And I always think it's good to step away from the subject first and then come back to it. So, what do we need to know about mammals? How many mammals are there on the planet? Any guesses? I've got time. Go on, somebody give me a guess. Give me a rough guess. How many mammal species on the planet can you think of? Not 21:21, that's the time. Hi Jude from Cardiff. So I'm going to tell you there's, roughly speaking, 4,150 species of mammals, about 4,150 or thereabouts, certainly last time I looked. How many species of bats are there? 12,500. Ooh, 200,000. Yeah, so 4,150. It's a hard question, isn't it? It's a lot harder than you might imagine. So bats are a really, really big proportion of that number of animals, of mammals. In fact, they're the second biggest group after the rodents, with about 1,400 species of bat out of those 4,150 mammals. So it's a really big proportion of global mammal biodiversity. A very important group, obviously, also because they are long evolved species. And to put that into context, what that means is that if you think that humans 5 million years ago were sort of Neanderthal-like, so hairy, grunting, primitive, not really using tools or anything like that. Is that Cardiff on a Friday night? It's parts of Cardiff on a Friday night, perhaps. Can you say that? Yeah. Bats have been found with from the fossil evidence to have been advanced enough to have been flying and echolocating at least 55 million years ago. Right, I just need to pause and do a battery check. Okay, fingers crossed. I've just gone from 80% battery to not very much, and the power bank light's gone out, so worst case scenario, I might have to go back to the house and find some more power. Don't know how that works. Hey, let's go with it. Let's see if we find some bats. So it's a really big proportion of the bats that we've got. Sorry, really big proportion of the mammals that we've got. So 55 million years ago, bats were flying, they were echolocating. So 50 million years before humans really came on the scene as recognisable humans. So it's really significant. And this is to some extent topical at the moment, because I'm going to get this out of the way now before I forget, because with the coronavirus pandemic that we've all been experiencing, there's been some association with bats. It would be foolish to not talk about it, I think. And connections are tenuous. There does appear to be a potential connection with bats, one particular species in fact, which is found particularly in one part of China. The link isn't proven. It's a lot more complicated than you may imagine. A lot of papers on the subject if you want to read about it, a lot of research papers. Sorry, I'm just reading messages as they come in as well. Rubbish at multitasking. And what we know is that bats, there's been an intermediary between bats and humans, if it has come from bats indeed, which is not guaranteed. And also there's some pretty good research to suggest that if it has leapt from bats, it probably did so decades ago, not recently, maybe 50 or 60 years ago, and via an intermediary species. And they don't really know. You've probably heard talk of snakes, pangolins, other things. A lot of people are expecting there to be some link with domesticated animals, like perhaps pigs or cattle or something like that, would also seem possible. So there is a connection, but I must emphasise it's to, at best, possibly, only possibly, one species of horseshoe bat only found in China. No connection. The virus has not been found or anything like it in any bats outside of China. Certainly no European bats, and certainly nothing in the UK. So it's good to get that out of the way. There is another issue, which is we need to be careful because there does seem to be some cross-species transmission possible. A tiger in the Bronx Zoo died from it, amongst other examples, and we just need to watch out that we don't actually end up as bat workers giving it to bats. So we're actually taking special precautions and avoiding all unnecessary contact with bats as much as possible at the moment to make sure that we don't give coronavirus back to bats, because that would be pretty catastrophic. Excuse me. So I need to just jiggle some cords because I'm running very low on power, which is very unfortunate because I started at 80% battery, and I've already exhausted a power bank apparently. Is Facebook Live very thirsty? Aha. Right. Oh, I've got some lights up now. That looks a bit better. Right. Whitchurch Meadows. Who said that? Oh, it's a bit contentious, that one, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. Development's always a thorny subject. Something I'd say about development is these days surveys tend to be done, ecological surveys tend to be done. By and large, they tend to be done pretty well. But there is this problem that you don't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Please don't blame your ecologist. I've been doing this for 20 odd years. I've been accused of being in bed with developers, not literally, but financially. I've been accused of taking bribes, all sorts of things. Just doesn't occur. We have a job to do. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a scientist. My job is to evaluate what is present on the site and what an impact can be, and to document that. I'm not a decision maker. We provide our reports, we put them into the appropriate authorities, and they're the ones that have to rule. And unfortunately, at the end, it all comes down to politics. So if we don't like the decisions that have been made about development, then it all comes down to the politicians. Where I live here in Radder in Cardiff, just at the end of the road, we've got the new Place d'Or development of, can't remember how many houses, 27,000 houses or something. It's a horrific sized development. I looked at the ecological work that was done at the impact assessment. Do you know what? I think it was pretty good. I think I'd have been proud if I'd have been involved in that piece of work. It's not very palatable. Clearly it's going to be a large impact, but I think they assessed the situation very well, and the people that make the decisions at the City Council here decided that that was going to go ahead, and that's the system that works. So please be kind to your ecologists. They're not the bad guys in this. And I often say to colleagues, if you weren't doing it, someone else would be doing it. And it would eventually get pushed further down the pile until someone even less and less qualified was actually doing the job. So just a little aside there, as I think it's Judith mentioned, the development down on the meadows. So I'm not seeing any bats yet. I am just going to pause and turn on one of my bat detectors because I've got the wrong one turned on at the moment. And you know what? I'm just going to put this down a bit. It's quite chilly here today, colder than I was expecting, so I'm just going to zip up my coat as well. So enjoy a brief shot of the tree canopy. Right, I'm back. There's a few things that I noticed doing this. Whose idea was this anyway? One is there's no gaps. Have I got to keep talking all the time? It's going to be really crap TV if I can't. If I've got to keep talking all the time. So I apologise for the babbling. But there are some advantages to doing it this way, which I suddenly realised as I was thinking about this afternoon. Oh, first bat. Let's make it a bit louder. Can you hear it? Hopefully you can hear it. Coming at 43 kilohertz on the bat detector there. Probably a few 43, 50. William, hi. No, it's not too windy actually. It was very blowy this morning and very rainy this afternoon. But I can't see the bat just yet. Oh yeah, I just caught a little glimpse of it. I tell you what, you don't need to look at me. Look at that patch of sky up there. And I'll put the bat detector there. So this is registering about 46. This is a Pipistrelle bat. It's got a very distinctive ploppy kind of sound. There's a kind of wet quality to it. And sorry, the hay fever's been getting me as well the last couple of days. And you see it. We're getting a bit noisier now. It's good, we've got some bats. Only ever once. 20 odd years of doing this. 1992 I did my first guided bat walk to the National Trust up in Cheshire. Age 16, am I allowed to tell you that? And I've done a lot of bat walks over the years. Only once have I ever done a bat walk where there were actually no bats at all for an entire hour and a half. So very pleased there's some bats here. What's that bit of sky? Let's see if we can see it. No, but it sounds really great on the detector. So 45 kilohertz is the lower of our two most abundant Pipistrelle species. This is a common Pipistrelle. Oh, there's the bat. Whether you'll be able to see it or not. Definitely a limitation, I'd say, on this. Right, I'm going to switch the camera around and see if I can do some really dodgy camera work. Annette, hi. I miss you, Annette. Haven't seen you in ages. You taught me everything I know. Nonsense. Nonsense. You kept me sane many times. Right. Let's see. I'm gonna try and do some dodgy camera work and see if we can actually spin this around. Saw it. Mark says he saw it. Good man. I love the sound, Hazel. The sound of the Pipistrelle just makes me happy. There it was. Did you see it then? This is so random. But I love it. I love that you're all there, even though you can't all be here. After the last few months, We were ill. My family got it in, we think, in February, so just a bit before the lockdown happened. So we've actually kind of confined to barracks for a little while longer. And I wouldn't say going stir crazy, because it's actually been really nice to be with the family and stuff more. But yeah, we're missing you guys. It's true to say. But yeah, it's really nice to come out and see some bats and to share them as well. So yeah, this is our common Pipistrelle. I'm hoping there might be some other bats, but my guilty confession is, even though I've lived with this little woodland about 100-200 yards off my front doorstep, as you saw at the beginning, I've never actually been in here with a bat detector. Maybe did once within the first few weeks that we moved, but life's been busy. I've had 2 kids since then, so never actually set foot in here. Walked through it, certainly the last few months, pretty much every day. Really enjoying it. I think it might be getting a little bit more attention soon. So let me tell you something about the British bats while we're listening to this lovely little creature buzzing around in the background. So we've got 17 species of bats breeding in the UK. The BCT website, Bat Conservation Trust website, tells me there's 18 species at the moment. Let's go with that. There's a species called the greater mouse-eared, which they find most winters in the tunnel in West Sussex, and there's only one. I think they call him Lonesome George or something. Seems a bit sad, doesn't it? In Wales, we're looking really at a maximum of 15 breeding species. There's just a couple that aren't found, so a couple of species that are found in England that aren't found here in Wales. I have no problem telling you that one of the richest sites I know and have had the pleasure of working at as a consultant and also leading courses at since about 2006, 2007 I think, Margam Park is one of the richest sites in Wales. We've just done some repair works to one of the turrets recently, and the licence that had to be provided to enable that work covered 9 species. And there's not many sites in Wales where you could find a single building that's confirmed to have 9 species roosting. This bat's just going backwards and forwards up here. So these 17 species are all insectivorous. In fact, all of the European bats are insectivorous. They eat a variety of insect prey. The Pipistrelles here taking the smallest, being the very small midges, tiny moths perhaps, that sort of type prey, up to the bigger bats, things like the noctules and the greater horseshoes, which will be taking some of the bigger beetles, even things as large as cockchafer beetles, some of the big dung beetles, and of course the big moths as well. It's really nice, just lovely to be out. It's cold, my hands are really cold, just to give you an idea what it's like out here. Clutching hold of all this gear. If my teeth start chattering, you'll know why. But these bats seem quite happy. I don't know how well it's coming over on the video, but there's occasional sort of, it almost sounds like a cheep sort of noise. That was me. And there's some social calls in amongst here as well, which is the bats just occasionally letting out a little peep to say, over here, or go away. And sometimes you'll notice also you get little feeding buzzers, and this is where the bat is going tick 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 like that. And you get, it's also known as a terminal buzz. There's the bat up there, just flying around the top of that conifer there. Come back, do it again, just once. Oh, 2 together, great. And the terminal buzz, or the feeding buzz, is literally as they close into an insect, they go tick 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 tick, the echolocation gets faster and faster and faster, and then they blast it with echolocation clicks at the last moment, just before they seize the prey. And then you get a very short silence afterwards, because they've got a gob full of insects probably, or hopefully. And echolocation is just the term that we use to describe this clever sonar type system that the bats use to navigate. So let's deal with some myths quickly. Echolocation is amazing. It's a very, very sophisticated navigation process. But bats can see. Bats are not blind. And in fact, in low light situations, they probably see better than we do. And they don't always need to echolocate. So you'll find often coming out of their roost, the place where they live, they'll be almost entirely silent. And an increasing use of technology like infrared cameras and thermal imaging cameras is really, really helping us with that. I'm just been amazed actually for a moment that nobody's walked through this woodland yet. It's a very popular dog walking spot. I'm astounded that I haven't actually had to explain myself. Maybe the nutter in the woods with the high-vis jacket on is scaring people away. If the police arrive, please will somebody ring up and vouch for me. I'm just going to come down to the other end a little bit and see if there's anything else going on. So bats broadly come out in very crudely in three blocks. There's the early bats, there's the middle emerging bats, and there's the dark bats, who really don't like to come out until it gets really dark. And we're in a very suburban context here, albeit with this lovely little patch of woodland. It's quite wet. I've got a low battery problem again. Let me just jiggle with the power. Okay. Just stay up on the gap. Oh right, yeah, it's a bit gloomy, isn't it? Yeah. I toyed with the idea of bringing some mega torch or something, but it's not very it's not very subtle when you're surrounded by houses apart from anything, let alone how disturbing it could be to the bats. You like the impression of the bat? Oh dear, sorry about that. I can do a few different species. If I get bored, if you ask nicely, I might do some more. God, you know you're desperate when you're failing by doing bat impressions, don't you? Okay, so yeah, where was I? The different emerging bats. So the Pipistrelles, particularly as a species called the nocturnal bat. Excuse me. It's a tree-dwelling bat. Is often a very early emerger. There's a nice bit of tandem flying going on here. Two bats flying together. Might talk about that later. So yeah, pips and the nocturals are the earliest emerging bats, usually very close on the sunset time, sometimes a little before, sometimes a little after, but pretty much within 20 minutes before and after sunset, the pips and the nocturals are out. And then you go into a mid-range where some of the myotis bats come out. Things like whiskered bats, Dorbenton's bats that you'll often see foraging over water. And then you tend to get darker bats, which come out, dark loving bats that come out later. Things like the horseshoe bats and the long-eared bats. Now this woodland, I have to say, I think would be lovely for long-eared bats. There's some slightly older properties in this direction. Wow, it's dark down there on the phone now. Okay, I'm assuming you can't really see much in that direction. I need to point at the sky. So some slightly, not a lot, but slightly older properties in that direction, which in combination with the trees could be very, very good for roosting long-eareds as well. And these trees are perfectly good for roosting bats. There's no doubt overall that trees get used by roosting bats more than buildings. We tend to think about bats in buildings because people are much more aware of them, but overall most bats are in trees, but they're just there in smaller numbers, I think. So what I'm hoping is that I might be able to last long enough to get a glimpse of some other species. Might get a noctule overhead. I've again done very little recording from the house. I spend such a lot of time doing bat stuff out of the house and away. I've never particularly been that desperate to do it in the garden. Occasionally we'll sit outside if we've got friends round or something with a beer in one hand and a bat detector in the other. But I don't particularly think about it that much at home, which you may find surprising, I don't know. You have to turn off, don't you? You have to switch off. I have on occasion seen noctule bats over the house, just incidentally. It's possible we could hear one of those. I might actually just go and stand outside the wood just for a moment, just to see if there's anything better view or anything that we can hear outside. Did I miss a story? Mark, good question. Have I explained how a bat detector works? Well, there's a good question. I won't do it in a lot of detail because it all gets a little bit complicated, but in essence the bat detector works by bringing down the very high frequencies of the bat. So for example, those bats back there were showing on the screen there. There we are. Last bat was 49 kilohertz. Nice thing about this bat detector, by the way, is it jumps to the peak frequency of the last bat, of the bat that it hears, and it holds that number until it hears a different frequency, which is excellent. So just popping out, there's the street lights just coming on, if you can see up there. I can hear some social calls. Yeah, so the detectors just drop down the very high pitch frequencies. The 40, 45 or 47 is 47 kilohertz. That's 47,000 hertz is the frequency, and our hearing, or human hearing, goes up to perhaps 16 or 17 kilohertz would perhaps be about normal for most adults. The lowest bats, noctules, come down to about 18, sometimes a little bit lower. So some people will hear them. Children can hear higher. I used to be able to hear very high, even as a younger adult. I could hear up into the 20s, not quite so much now. Yeah, quite light. I was looking out the window last night thinking, it's going to be quite light. Anyway, hopefully that slightly explains in very, very basic terms how a bat detector works. Just drops down that high pitch frequency into a range so we can actually hear it. And there are various different ways. It all comes down to maths, unfortunately. Very different ways you can process that signal, but that's really how the detector works. Let me just see if I can read some questions while we've got a brief moment of quiet. I'm conscious I'm stood sort of very close to people's houses, so they're going to think I'm a bit of a nutter. Jackie, nice to see you, Jackie. Beer and a bat detector, that's the way. Michael, how you doing, mate? Do a greater horseshoe. Impression of a noctule. Okay, I'll do a noctule bat. So noctule bats have got a very distinctive two-part call. Oh my god, there's people in these houses, they'll be able to hear this. So noctules, very distinctive two-part call. Some people call them the chip shop bat because they make a kind of chip chop, they sort of thing like that. Hopefully any bat people would be able to recognise that. I'm just popping back into the woods. If it looks a bit like the Blair Witch Project, I promise you it's not quite as dark as it appears on the screen. Just reading some comments. Some other questions. How do you know that bats were using echolocation 55 million years ago? And is there a particular time of year for when their mating seasons begin? Okay, how do we know that bats were echolocating 55 million years ago? It's a very, very good question. There's a distinctive bone in the throat of bats, which is associated with echolocation. And it only exists in echolocating animals, i.e. bats, and not other mammals with similar flight capability, well, not similar flight capabilities, but similar physiology. And that bone has been found to be present in the fossil record of fossils that old. Particular time of year for their mating. Okay, yeah. Bats mate in the autumn, and the babies are born in the spring. The system that takes place within British bats, there are a few different systems in bats around the world, 1,400 species. You get a lot of variation in 1,400 species, but the system that happens with all the European bats is a system called sperm storage, where the bats mate in the autumn but do not actually fall pregnant. Fertilisation doesn't actually take place until the spring, until they wake up from hibernation. It's a very clever strategy because you never know quite how long winter is going to be. You don't know how long it's going to last. So there's some kind of trigger in the spring, which we don't entirely know. It could be day length, could be change in diet, could be change in temperature, could be a combination of all of those things. Triggers some kind of hormone response, at which point the females become pregnant, and the pregnancy begins usually sort of 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the species, something like that. And the baby bats are born end of May, June. In Wales, mostly in June. Further south, go down to the south coast, they certainly start in May. In Scotland, it's usually end of June and perhaps even into July a little bit, which just illustrates the effect of different weather patterns. So the babies are born right now. Yeah, babies will be born right now. Because this is the bountiful time. I assume like my family, you've probably all been out and about a little bit more, hopefully if you're able to, and notice just how lush and green it is everywhere. Huge amount of sunshine, of course, in May. Probably a bit too much sunshine, if we're honest. But everything looks absolutely gorgeous at the moment, and insects galore. So if you're an insect-eating creature, that's the perfect time to have your final days of your pregnancy and the early stage of your new baby, because there's loads of food around. It's plentiful. It's easy to get hold of. There's still a few Pipistrelle bats. I'm hoping you can see something. My fingers are starting to go to sleep now, so I'm trying to hold this as still as I can, but there's virtually 3 bats in the air at a time there. These all appear to be common Pipistrelles at the moment. It's busy though, it is busy. I'd be a liar, I said I hadn't done any bat work around here, I'd be a liar if I said I hadn't clocked a few bats emerging from certain directions. I've never actually found roosts. I've anecdotally heard of a couple. I haven't checked them out locally yet. That's something we'll perhaps come to in a year or two. But this is the kind of species bat that I would certainly expect to see in this area. So just popping out the other side of this tiny little woodland. So this is totally unrehearsed, promise. It was a total experiment. I just thought, let's keep this real. What should we do? This is supposed to be a bat walk from home, because I can't do a bat walk in Neath Talbot. So here we are, just popped out the other side of the woodland now. Gosh, yes, the difference on the phone, yes, okay. I can see really easily without a torch. It's nothing like as dark as the phone makes it appear. Okay. Tandem flying, Chris. Hi Chris, nice to see you. Tandem flying at this time of year, no, the babies won't be on the wing yet. end of the month soonest, I'd say, pretty much. I mean, it's been mild, so technically by middle June could be possible, but it would seem early, usually end of June, beginning of July. That's when the baby bats usually start coming into the bat carers, the ones that have a little mishap, lose their way in the world. I've forgotten the question now. Tandem flying. I just saw it a few moments ago. I think I said there were 2 bats in flight. We don't entirely know. There's usually increased amounts of social calling, so interactive calls between them. I'm just going to look past the end of this house here. And so there's a couple of explanations. It could be mum and last year's baby, which would now be classed as an adult. In Pipistrelles, that would be a mature animal in its first full year. It could be males still interested in mating. Some species mate also in the spring. This is fairly recent research. It's been confirmed in long-eared bats, brown long-eared bats in Poland, and it's actually been confirmed in Wales. There's a paper published from some research in Monmouthshire confirming lesser horseshoe bats undertaking spring swarming for mating purposes, where large numbers of bats congregate in order to try and mate. And this would be for the purpose of ensuring that any females that hadn't got pregnant in the autumn were able to in the spring. How far from a roost do they venture out to feed and fly? That's a good question, Jane, thank you. It varies massively between the different species. 17 species are, if you think of all the different breeds of dog that you know, now they're all dogs rather than different species as the bats are, but just as an example, if you think of the difference between a Chihuahua and a Great Dane, if you compare a Pipistrelle bat, one of these things above us is probably about 4.5, maybe 5 grams in weight. Compare that to a nocturnal bat, which is probably 35 or 40 grams in weight. You can see there's quite a difference. So these bats are probably doing most of their thing. Little robin singing its end of the day song there. And shouting at me to go away. So most of these Pipistrelles are probably doing the majority of the feeding, certainly the females, with probably 500 metres of their roost. Their home range would probably be around about 1 kilometre, 1,000 metres, with a total range of perhaps up to 4 or 5 kilometres. Most of the time. There may be some seasonal movement, for example, to different locations for hibernation, I suppose, would be the main one. A nocturnal bat, in complete contrast, is a very fast flying bat, very large, powerful bat, probably flying at something close to 30 miles an hour at full tilt, and they could do 40 miles in a night, 50 miles perhaps, and certainly they've been recorded doing seasonal migrations of 1,000 kilometres. There are good examples of animals with rings on being found 1,000 kilometres away. A good topical one recently, and one that we've been lucky enough to study here in South Wales. Some roosts found in Cardiff, and also in Margam Park. In fact, one of the first roosts in Wales was found at Margam Park for the Nethusius pipistrelle, which is the third and slightly less common of the 3 pipistrelles. It's a migratory species, unlike the other 2, unlike the common and the soprano pipistrelle. It's a migratory species. So, that's the other reason I think that the robin was upset, was there a little cat. And there have been some ringing records, very exciting ringing records, in just the last few years enthusiast Pipistrelle turning up 1600 kilometres, and they're coming from Latvia and places like that. And in some cases they're on their way down to the Mediterranean perhaps, but they're being picked up in southern Britain usually. Closest to us in Wales so far I think is near Bristol, Folly Farm, Blagden Lake, that's the place. Folly Farm's a lovely training centre run by the Avon Wildlife Trust nearby. Right, just having another battery adjustment. Okay. Right. Jane, what was the question I didn't answer? How far from a roost do they go? Oh, there we go. Did I get to it? Okay. Adam. Hi, Adam. What evidence do you suggest people submit to support their bat records for them to be accepted or verified? Oh, that's a techie one. What evidence? Okay, so there's a couple of different types of records that we get for bat data. One obviously is a bat in the roost, perhaps less frequently a bat in the hand. And the other is bat detector records. Now, bat detector records are very easy to get. We're getting dozens a minute here at the moment, and I could put a detector out here tonight and record and probably have a really good species inventory in just a few nights with a small recording detector hidden away somewhere in this little patch of woodland. Verifying that is a much harder issue. There are various detectors on the market that do what you might call automated analysis. It's great. I mean, let's not knock it. It's very clever stuff. A friend of mine who's involved with one of the manufacturers of those things said perhaps we shouldn't have called it auto analysis. We should call it analysis assist, because it's not fail-safe. It's not right all of the time, and in fact in some cases, in certain situations, it's almost as wrong as often as it is right. So you have to use those auto-analysis results that come through on some of the swanky bat detectors with some considerable care. The best way to verify them is through experience. The best way to get experience, of course, is to have spent a lot of time sitting outside of known species roosts where the species has been confirmed in the hand, and then you listen to them. And that's something I did early in my professional career to try and get better at this, was to actually find out where there were known roosts and go and sit near them and just listen to them and understand it, and then look at the analysis of the calls on the computer afterwards. I should redo it. It would be interesting to do again, I think. For records in the hand, photographic analysis is very useful. And photographing key features, if ever you end up with a bat, a poorly bat, an injured bat, or a bat that's disturbed in torpor, which is another way that we describe hibernation, photograph without a flash on your phone. Camera phone is fine, from 2 or 3 different angles is brilliant. Head, things that we're interested in, ears, the back end, tails, hind feet are always good. Something in it for scale, a ruler, a biro, set of keys. Scale is brilliant because it means that we can really work out how big something is. It's quite quiet. I'm going to go back in the woods. And then records can be verified, and they tend to be just verified by, I don't know why Adam's asking me this, he's an expert on the subject, but they can be verified by species recorders, and most counties have a species recorder who will verify records. It's perhaps a good opportunity to talk about bat groups, and we're very lucky in South Wales that we've got pretty good coverage of bat groups. They are active to various different degrees. Most of them have got Facebook pages. And there's stuff going on. There's some really cool projects going on. I know the National Enthusiast Project has been undertaking trapping for Nethusiast Pipistrelle at Margam Park, and that's something that will be ongoing once the restrictions are lifted, so probably not this year, but fingers crossed we'll be able to get back out next year. And various other projects and things taking place. Bat groups come and go, a bit like the tide. People change, and you get a few years of real enthusiasm and energy, and that naturally wanes a little bit, and then hopefully you get some fresh blood in, and you get some new projects, exciting new projects taking place. Right, let me scroll down, try and take some more. Hazel, yes, thank you. I'd forgotten about that one. The female enthusiast that you ringed in Northumberland on your project. I was watching Detectorists the other night, the TV series about finding the gold coin by the metal detectorists, and catching the enthusiast Pipistrelle in the first place is bingo moment. Getting a ring on it is wonderful, but then to actually get the call or the email months or years later to say, we've found your bat. By the way, it's flown all the way, in Hazel's case, from Northumberland to Poland. Wow, that's brilliant. I mean, and that's what this research is all about. It means you know that you've looked at the bat, you've studied the bat, you've taken all the details, you've released it, and it's safely and successfully made it all the way to Poland. Sort of 600, 700, 800 kilometers, something like that, for a bat that probably weighs 10, 12, 14 grams, something like that. Probably less than a pound coin. Anyway, let me just read some more questions. It was the highlight of your year, yes. It was the highlight of many of our years, Hazel, because we were all doing it. We kind of all felt the love on that one, I think. It was excellent. There was another lovely question. Torch. Does using a torch when out with a bat detector deter bats? And I see Annette says it just messes up your night vision. So there's two really good points to that. If you go buying one of these mega bright torches that you can get on the internet now, there's no doubt that you will end up scaring your bats off. It's as simple as that. In the roost, they don't like it, they'll hide themselves away, and in the open they'll just go and fly somewhere else. They don't like it. You can get away with low level light. Some species are very light tolerant. You can see perhaps here, I'm just coming up to the road, you can see that we've had the street lights changed to LEDs here fairly recently, and they never seem to be that bright, to be honest, and I think that's great. I think the light spill is much more directional. I don't know how well you can see, but it's quite a warm colour, which is supposed to be better overall. So I think it's probably a positive thing that around here anyway. It is suburbia after all. So I would certainly avoid using a very bright torch on bats. We as bat workers aren't supposed to use a flash to photograph bats, but we can take incidental photos without a flash. Whether there's really a big issue there is dubious these days because torches tend to be quite bright anyway. But them's the rules. What was the other point? Oh yes, messing up your night vision, as Annette said, is a very good point, because your eyes can take, I think I've seen it written down, it takes 20 minutes for your eyes to readjust to dark conditions after you've seen a very bright light. So if a car drives past you, it might take as much as 20 minutes for your eyes to readjust back down to low light conditions. I tend to work without a torch most of the time. I've got pretty good nighttime vision. So unless it's really dark, I tend to avoid using a torch as much as possible to preserve my night vision, which I think is pretty important. Okay. Sorry, just reading some more questions. Adam says, I'd like to know whether a screenshot of the trace as well as the auto ID is sufficient. You can answer that later. I don't like screenshots, Adam. I don't mind telling you that. Yes, we could go into this in more detail offline, but I don't like screenshots because you can't manipulate them, and everybody tends to have their settings slightly differently, and from a screenshot you can't readily see what those are, and often with the different software it can be hard to see. Oh, I got a different bat species. Oh, it's gone. I had 59 up on screen momentarily and a higher sounding bat. So I just briefly had a soprano Pipistrelle. You may have heard it. I am listening. 50 is a bit inconclusive, but most likely when the majority of your calls are in the 40s and then you get the odd one, 49, 50, 51, balance of probability is it's still the common Pipistrelle because they all operate with the band, and the more bats you've got they tend to stack their echolocation calls, so you might get some at 43, one at 45, one at 47, one at 49, add in another one, it might pop in at 51 just occasionally. So yeah, there was just the briefest call of a soprano probably just passing through the top of the canopy. There's something that's worth talking about with Pipistrelle bats because they're so abundant, yet we know so little about them in some respects. So they roost in houses a lot, so we think we know a lot about them. So we do know quite a lot about the way that they use buildings. We know very little about the way that they use trees. And it seems to be quite different. They seem to be much more transient, much more temporary, their roost sites in trees. And also we know very, very little about their hibernation. So there's a very small number of Pipistrelle hibernation roosts known anywhere in the UK, of any quantity, any size. In, I think it's Lithuania, there's some underground caves where they've got huge numbers, 70,000 bats, the largest hibernation sites in Europe, I'm sure. And they've got masses, they've got clusters of 10,000 Pipistrelles in one place. We've never found that in the UK. We don't think that happens. My take on it is that the landscape is porous. It's sieve-like. You look in here. Where could you fit a bat that's the size of half your little finger, that can fit into a gap that's probably 7 or 8 millimeters across? The answer is thousands of places, literally thousands of places. And so I think that what's happening is that these bats are largely melting into the landscape, and we're learning a little bit more. There's been a brilliant Bats and Trees project run by a guy called Henry Andrews over the last few years, which is totally transformational. Books, superb, essential reading for anybody that does this professionally. It's completely revolutionised our knowledge about the way bats use trees. And totally brought on what's going on. Oh, some members of the public. I'm just going to go and stand slightly out of the way so they don't completely think I'm barking mad. But I am barking mad. Bat specialist. They don't know. Weirdo in the woods. As I said at the beginning, there's only one thing worse than a weirdo in the woods, and that's an inconspicuous weirdo in the woods, which is why I use my high vis. So I'm going to let that family pass through the woods whilst they ponder in their minds who the bloke with the high vis talking to his phone is. Yeah, so hibernating bats is a great one. There's a very talented Dutch bat worker called Echolocation who's done some fascinating work there and actually found that they've got roosts using high-rise buildings in the cities, and the bats appear to be moving into the cities and using sort of 1970s tower blocks and things like that, which is fun. This is Pipistrelles again, because we just don't know where most of ours go. In Wales I can probably think of 3, maybe 4 locations where I could perhaps find a maximum of 20 hibernating pipistrelles most winters. That's it for our most abundant species of bat. It's crazy, it's crazy. I can actually find more of our rarer bats, like horseshoe bats. I could find you more greater horseshoe bats hibernating than I could find you. So probably our rarest bat. I'd probably find you more of those than I could find you pipistrelles in any given December, January or February. Perhaps worth touching on hibernation before we have to go, and just explain that hibernation is a strategy that bats use in countries that experience pronounced winters like we do, rather than the tropics where you just have a wet or a dry season. So we actually get very cold temperatures, and of course bats are insectivores, and in the winter you don't get many insects. So what happens is that bats go into a deep torpor, or a hibernation if you like, which is where they drop their heart rate and their breathing rate right down. They put themselves somewhere safe, free from disturbance, relatively constant temperature. It seems to be a feature they look for, and high humidity, because bats have a huge surface area. If you bear in mind that the wings of bats is made of skin breathes, breathing loses moisture. If you compare that surface area to a shrew or a mouse with roughly equivalent body weight to a bat, you can see that the bat's at much greater risk of drying out. Just having a quick listen around. Just the odd bat on the edge here. So hibernation is used as a strategy for bats to survive the winter when there aren't many insects around and when it's very cold. And so they go into this prolonged torpor across the coldest months, and it's triggered by the cold weather, and the wake up is triggered by the warmer weather. And it's not just a long sleep, it's actually cyclical, so the bats will probably rouse during it, wake, may go and feed if they can, in sheltered areas or cave entrance or something like that, and they may go and drink, and then possibly relocate, and then carry on until the spring when they wake up. And then it all happens all over again. So you go through that process, the babies are born, they grow through the summer, the bats mate in the autumn. Nice bat passing us here on the outside, another common pip. The months start to cool down, the mating slows down, bats start to move off to their hibernation sites, and they hibernate through the winter and then back through into the spring. Females fall pregnant, babies are born, and it all happens again. The cycle of life. Have I got any more good questions? Greater horseshoes, hibernating. Alison, hi Alison. Greater horseshoes tend to hibernate underground. So it tends to be caves, mines, cellars, ice houses, that sort of thing. In South Wales, for example, some of the places that they're found are cellars of often large mansions, large stately homes, and also in caves, natural caves and mine caves on Gower, for example, quite well used by bats, and caves and mines. So some of the mines around, not so much coal mines, but certainly the old metal mines, lead, tin, silver mines and things where they occur. Gold mines, Dollarcuthay, for example, up in Carmarthenshire. There's greater horseshoe bats quite regularly recorded there. Gardening for bats, somebody's asking about that. What sort of place? Hibernations. What was the reference to the study? So do they need woods or buildings most? Hey, that's a good question, Jane. That's a really good question. Do they need woods or buildings more? If I had to choose one, without a shadow of a doubt, I would say woods, trees. If you're not familiar with the book, get hold of a copy of the History of the Countryside by Oliver Rackham. and read about his definitions of the wildwood. I used to run a consultancy called Wildwood Ecology, and I was totally inspired by this concept. The actual concept is that the UK was kind of 97% covered in forest. Now that probably is now being shown to be not exactly true, but largely, I think they used to say, wasn't it the Robin Hood legend, that you could go all the way from the edge of London to Nottingham in the trees without coming down to the ground? Is that right? I think that's right. So you could travel several hundred miles without putting your feet on the ground, swinging from tree to tree, if you were Robin Hood, presumably. And I think that gives you an important concept, is that humans have only been having the impact that we've been having on the planet for a couple of thousand years, really, in significant terms. And most of that impact has been in the last 250 years, since the Industrial Revolution. So, started with the Romans, really. They started messing things up. And we've just accelerated that pace. So trees win hands down for me. Building roofs can be individually important to certain colonies. They can be absolutely key. But overall, at the population level, trees, trees, trees. And this is why it's very hard to see projects like the HS2 rail project going ahead with the impact that it's having on so many ancient woodlands. And if you're not familiar with the stats, have a look at the Woodland Trust website. And it's undeniably alarming. And I think even the ecologists working on the scheme, they know what they're dealing with. I'd rather they were there. There's no doubt. I think it's better. We've got good ecologists working on these schemes. They will get better outcomes. But like I said at the beginning, you don't make omelettes without breaking eggs. And if you don't like it, change the way you vote. It's as simple as that. So much of this stuff happens at the top level of politics, and political pressure has an awful lot to answer for. Probably shouldn't get any more political than that, really. Right, any more questions? I'm just having a say no to HS2. Yeah. Let's leave that there. It's difficult because these things impact on a lot of lives, the economy. These are not straightforward decisions and choices. But I really hope that we wake up from this pandemic having learnt some lessons. Like, funnily enough, an awful lot of people, turns out, don't need to drive to the office every day. Who knew? It's got to have an impact. How many more people have noticed the extra bird song? Well, the roads have been quiet. Some of the work I do is as an essential worker for some key construction projects. I support some projects. So I actually had to do a couple of trips out during lockdown legitimately. And it was amazing driving the roads because they were so quiet. But I saw so much more wildlife than I'd normally see. Talking to a friend a little while ago, he had a close encounter with a wild boar in Monmouthshire in a woodland he's been studying for a couple of decades. Never seen boar up close like that before. Occasionally signs, but never a close encounter. So really interesting. Right. Can somebody give me a time check, please? I'm just watching the rising moon over there, which is looking rather lovely next to that lamppost. I'm wondering what the time might be. Are there any radio tracking surveys done to find where pipistrelles go in winter? Well, this is really tricky. That's a good question. While I wait for the answer to the time check, because my brain's starting to get cold now. Pipistrelles, winter, higher radio tracking. Okay. The problem is that radio tracking on bats is difficult. It's really difficult. Radio tracking's hard at the best of times. This is where you glue a little radio transmitter that makes a little beep, usually once a second, and then you use a radio device with a directional aerial on it to find said critter. It's very simple if you're tracking something that moves slowly. Hedgehogs. I'd love to do a study on hedgehogs. But bats that move at 15 or 20 miles an hour through the air with no obstacles in their way are somewhat harder to keep up with. Especially when the road goes east-west and the bat goes north over a river, and then a road, and then a piece of private land that you can't cross. And the radio tags are attached to the bats by glue, usually a colostomy adhesive, which is a latex-based glue used for appending ostomies onto people's skin. So it's a safe, medically safe glue. And they don't stay on that long. Sometimes they fall off within a day or two. I think my own experience, certainly the last few years, I'd say my average, I've been keeping bats on for about tags on for about 10 to 14 days, and that's the sort of the top end. Maybe it just means I use a bit too much glue, I'm not sure. Yeah, so I think 16 or 18 days would be the absolute tops you'd expect a tag to stay on. So usually what we do is we get tags that have a battery that will only last that long, because there's no point carrying extra weight of a bigger battery. Or what you do is you have the power output, the signal made stronger for a shorter period of time, so you've got a better chance of finding it. It's particularly true even with something like Pipistrelle bats that could go into, say, a very thick tree or deep into a cavity inside a building. You might really struggle to pick up the signal then. So you'd have to time the period when you put that tag on absolutely perfectly to the time when they suddenly moved off to their hibernation site. And I'm not aware that that's been attempted yet. Bats are incredible. Oh yes, headless a horseshoe. Took residence in our stables. Max, I'm jealous. Right, hold on a sec. I just need to turn the brightness up because I can't read the comments anymore. Sean McHugh, thank you, Sean. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Catherine Harrison, so good. Thank you so very much. One of Shelley's heart pals. That's my wife. Introduced you to Strider, our long-eared bat. Hey, Lynn. Congratulations on 20 years, Lynn. 20 years in the ecology business. There's an ecologist who's made some seriously positive changes to the environment. Good on you, Lynn. Well done. Jane, remember my question if you can. How far from roosts do bats go? So, very quickly, I think I'm perhaps only touched on that. What did I say? About a kilometre average-ish for the Pipistrelles. About 30 to 40 miles for the noctules. Everything else, bit in between. But don't forget about the migrating bats, which if you're a Pipistrelle, you might go 20 or 30 miles. I think long-eared bats have also been recorded doing those sorts of distances. If you're an enthusiast Pipistrelle, you might go 1,500 miles, so quite considerably more. Okay, let's just have a little flick back. Any other questions? Because I think my voice is going to go. 22:24. Thank you everybody for the time check. So I'm going to be political, David. Thank you. Yes, well, hard not to, isn't it? Been in the business too long, maybe. Would bats use culverts, Mike? Yes. Obviously, the concrete preformed sections are not so great. Bats will fly through them. They need to be big, though. So if we're specifying mitigation, for example, on road schemes, for a short culvert, you'd probably be looking at a minimum of 0.8 metres, or ideally a metre diameter. For a bigger crossing, like under a dual carriageway or motorway, you'd be looking at 1.5 to 2 metres ideally. And in many cases, what we try and do is use the cattle underpasses where they walk the cows underneath the motorway, or a stream or river crossing, and actually funnel the bats to them. The cost of increasing the diameter of culverts, I'm told, is massive, absolutely massive. It's very hard. It's all to do with the incline that's required and how far back to meet the regulations for heavy lorries and things, but that's a much more complicated subject. Right, let's see if there's one more. I think I saw something come in. Hazel, do it Hazel. Thanks William. More than enough apparently. Right, I'm going to sign off. I'll hang around and do some questions online on the group. So I've been Richard Crompton from Cardiff Back Group. It's been an absolute pleasure having your virtual company in the woods tonight in my tiny little corner. I'm wandering home now through the streets of Radda back to my wife and kids. And yeah, thanks very much. Check out the website for the various back groups around the place when you want to see what's going on. And if you've got any more questions, please feel free to ping me a message. Ping any questions over on the Facebook page now or in future. And you can check me out. I'm on Facebook. My company is also called Ecology on Demand, specialist ecology company. Troubleshooting bat problems mostly. Loads of training, perhaps not quite so much training this year. So I shall say thanks everybody, Nostar, Dachava, and see you at a bat event sometime. Thank you. Good night.